He came to Asaba with one bag and one question. Could anyone love him for who he was and not for what he had? He found Miriam, and for a while it felt like the answer was yes. But someone close to him had been watching, planting, poisoning, and by the time Ezra realized the threat was never Miriam, it was almost too late. In part 2, a message arrived from an unknown number. One line: ask Demas how he knew your mother had already met Miriam. Tonight, Ezra finally looks in the direction he never thought to question, and what he finds there will change everything. Sit back, relax, and let us finish this story together. The message sat in Ezra's phone like something alive. He read it again that evening in the small room. Then he put the phone down and sat very still. He thought about everything carefully. His mother's first phone call, the things she had said about Miriam asking questions, the way Demas had appeared at the Gold Rock branch shortly after Ezra arrived, the vacancy he had applied for, the position he had quietly taken in the operations unit. Ezra had believed Demas when he said he missed him. He had believed him because that was what Demas did. He said true things for completely false reasons. But now, sitting in that small room with that message on his screen, Ezra was no longer asking whether Miriam was hiding something. He was asking a completely different question. How much did Demas know about his mother? And how did he know it? Because Ezra had never told Demas about Naomi's visit to Asaba. He had never mentioned it, not once. Which meant only one thing: Demas already knew, because Demas made it happen. Ezra picked up the phone. He did not call Demas, not yet. He needed to understand the full picture first. He lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above him, and for the first time in this entire story, the anger he had been carrying quietly and patiently found its correct address. The next morning, Ezra arrived at the office carrying everything quietly, the way he always did. The investigation in his mind was still running, but he kept his face neutral, his posture ordinary, his movements unremarkable. He sat at his desk, opened his files, began his work. For the first hour, the office was its normal self. Then, Haman appeared. He walked to the center of the office the way he always did when he wanted an audience. He stopped, looked around at the workers bent over their desks. Then he looked at Ezra. Ezra. Ezra looked up. "Stand up," Haman said. His voice was measured, deliberate, the voice of a man who had decided this was the moment. Ezra stood slowly. The office went quiet, the way it always did when Haman performed. "I have been reviewing your conduct over the past several weeks," Haman began. He clasped his hands behind his back. "Your work is below standard. Your attitude is insubordinate. You have questioned my instructions on multiple occasions." He looked around the office briefly, making sure everyone was listening. They were. "I am placing you on a formal performance review effective immediately, and I will be recommending to management that your employment with Gold Rock Enterprises be terminated." The office was completely silent. Some workers stared at their desks. Some looked at Ezra. Miriam looked up from her desk across the room. Her expression was very still. Ezra stood in the center of the floor. He did not look angry. He did not look afraid. He simply looked at Haman with the calm, patient expression of a man who has decided to let something finish before he responds. Haman opened his mouth to continue. Then the office door opened, and everything changed. Two men in dark suits stepped through the door first, then a third. Then the door opened wider, and a Nigerian man in his early 60s walked in. Tall, broad, moving with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had never needed to announce himself in any room he had ever entered. His skin was deep dark brown, his close-cropped hair was graying at the temples, his beard was full and neat. He wore an impeccable agbada in deep navy blue, the kind of clothing that does not need to say anything because everything about it already has. He was Jairus, chairman of Gold Rock Enterprises, and he had walked into his own company's Asaba branch on an ordinary Tuesday morning to find his son standing in the middle of the office floor being publicly humiliated. The room went completely still. Several senior staff members who recognized him straightened immediately. One person near the back quietly stood up. Jairus walked forward slowly. His eyes moved around the room. Then they found Ezra. He looked at his son for a long moment. Something passed between them that no one else in the room could read. Then Jairus looked at Haman. Haman had not yet understood what was happening. He was still standing in the center of the floor with his hands clasped behind him, his expression shifting from authority to confusion. Jairus stopped a few feet away from him. He looked at him with the quiet, settled gaze of a man who has seen everything and is never surprised by anything. "I heard what you were saying as I came in," Jairus said. His voice was calm, completely calm, the way a very deep river is calm on the surface. "Please," he said, "continue." Haman looked at Jairus, then at the men in suits behind him, then at the staff members who were now looking at him with expressions he had never seen directed at him before. Something in his chest began to sink. I was just, he began. "You were recommending that this young man be terminated," Jairus said quietly. "Please, continue. I would like to hear the full reasoning." The office was so silent that the ceiling fans overhead could be heard clearly. Haman's mouth opened, closed. His carefully pressed shirt suddenly felt too tight. His polished shoes suddenly felt very far from the ground. "Sir," he said, his voice losing its shape, "I did not know." "What did you not know?" Jairus asked simply. Haman looked at Ezra, then back at Jairus. The resemblance he had never noticed before was now completely visible. The same jaw, the same deep-set eyes, the same quality of stillness in the face of pressure. "I did not know he was—" "That he was what?" Jairus said, not unkindly, just precisely. Haman said nothing. Jairus turned to the senior staff member standing nearest to him. "Please pull Mr. Haman's employment file and bring it to the conference room." He turned back to Haman. "We will speak privately." Then he looked at the rest of the office. "Everyone else, please return to your work." He walked toward the conference room. The men in suits followed. Haman stood alone in the center of the floor for one long, terrible moment. Then he walked after them, his polished shoes making small sounds on the tile floor in a completely silent office. Later that afternoon, after the meetings were done, and the office had slowly returned to something resembling normal, Jairus found Ezra in the small break room at the back of the building. He closed the door. The two of them sat across from each other. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Jairus looked at his son carefully. "The test is over," he said quietly. Ezra looked at him. "I know," he said. Jairus studied him. "But something else is happening here." It was not a question. Ezra looked at the table, then up. "There is a woman," he said. Jairus nodded slowly. "Tell me." And for the first time, Ezra told his father everything. Miriam, the small room, the soup she had brought without being asked, the distance that had grown between them, his mother's warnings, Demas's careful words in corridors and quiet moments, and the message from an unknown number that had turned him around and pointed him in a direction he had not expected. Jairus listened without interrupting. When Ezra finished, the room was quiet. Then Jairus leaned forward slowly. "Demas called me," he said. Ezra frowned. "He called me 3 weeks after you arrived here. He told me things about the woman, Miriam, that I did not believe. I told him I trusted your judgment. He did not call again." Ezra stared at him. "He called you?" Jairus nodded. "And then he called your mother." The room shifted. Everything Ezra thought he understood rearranged itself in a single moment. "He called mother," Ezra said slowly. "He told her what he told you." Jairus nodded.
Everything your mother believed about this woman, every warning she gave you, came from Demas. Ezra sat back. The full picture assembled itself in front of him with horrible clarity. Demas had not been watching. Demas had been building, piece by piece, call by call. The entire structure of doubt that had nearly destroyed the one real thing Ezra had found had been constructed by the person he trusted most.
Ezra found Demas that evening. Not at the office, at the small room. Demas was sitting in the plastic chair when Ezra walked in. He had let himself in the way old friends do, as if the door and everything behind it belonged to him as much as anyone. He looked up when Ezra entered. His expression was easy, comfortable, the wide smile already forming. "You look like a man who has had an interesting day," Demas said. Ezra closed the door. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the room and looked at Demas, not with anger, with something much quieter, much more dangerous. The specific stillness of a man who finally knows everything and is choosing how to speak it. "You called my mother," Ezra said. The smile on Demas's face did not disappear immediately. It held for one moment longer, the smile of a man still calculating whether there is a way out. Then it faded. "Ezra, you called my father too." Demas said nothing. "You applied for a job at this branch not because you missed me." A pause. "You came here because of Miriam." The room was completely quiet. Demas looked at him. For the first time in this entire story, the careful mask he had been wearing was completely still, not performing, not calculating, just a man sitting in a plastic chair, being seen for exactly what he was. "You were supposed to test women," Demas said. His voice was quiet, different from usual, stripped of its charm. "You were supposed to test them and find out the truth and come home. That was the plan." Ezra looked at him. "And then I saw her," Demas continued, "and I understood immediately what you had found." A pause, "And I could not let you have it." The honesty of it landed in the room like something heavy, not dramatic, just true. And somehow the truth of it was worse than any lie he had told. Ezra stood there for a long moment. Then he spoke. "We are done, Demas." Demas looked at him. "Ezra, we are done." Ezra opened the door. Demas stood up slowly. He walked toward the door. Then he stopped. "She is remarkable," he said quietly, one final time. Ezra said nothing. Demas walked out. The door closed behind him, and in the small room, in the silence, Ezra stood alone for a long time. 3 days after Jairus' visit, Naomi sat in her sitting room in Buguma. Her husband had told her everything. She had listened without speaking, without defending herself, without explaining. She had simply sat and received every word. When Jairus finished, she was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "I sent the message." Jairus looked at her. "The unknown number?" "I sent it to Ezra." She looked at her hands. "By the time I understood what Demas had done, I could not call Ezra directly. He would have asked me questions I was not ready to answer. So I sent the message, just enough to turn him around." Jairus was quiet. "I was wrong about the girl," Naomi said. The words cost her something. Anyone who knew Naomi understood exactly how much. "I was given a false picture, and I chose to believe it because it confirmed what I already feared." She looked up. "I need to call her." Miriam was at home when her phone rang. She looked at the screen, a number she did not recognize. She answered. "Miriam." She knew the voice immediately. "Mrs. Naomi," she said quietly. A brief silence. Then Naomi spoke. "I am calling because I owe you something I should have given you from the beginning." Miriam said nothing. She waited. "I was wrong about you," Naomi said. Her voice was steady. But beneath the steadiness, something was present that had not been there in any of their previous encounters. Honesty. Unguarded. Unperformed. "The things I believed about you were not true. I was told lies by someone I trusted, and I chose to act on them without finding out the truth for myself. A pause. I came to that room, and I looked at you, and I judged you before I knew you. That was wrong, and I am sorry." Miriam held the phone and said nothing for a moment. Then, "I understood why you did it," she said quietly. "You love your son, and you had been hurt before on his behalf." Naomi was silent. "I was not angry at you," she continued. "I was just tired." Another silence. Then Naomi said, "He wants to find you. He has been trying to find the right way to come to you." Miriam looked at the window. The evening light was fading outside. She said, "Tell him that he does not need to find the right way. He just needs to come." He came that evening, not to the office, to her door. He knocked once. She opened it. They looked at each other for a moment without speaking. Then she stepped aside. He came in. Her room was small and neat and honest, the kind of space that tells you everything about the person who lives in it. They sat, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between them was not heavy. It was just quiet. Ezra spoke first. "I know what happened now. I know about Demas. I know about my mother. I know what was done, and I know why you pulled back." Miriam looked at him. "I am sorry," he said. "Not for the test, but for letting doubt take root in me, when I had already seen everything I needed to see." Miriam was quiet. "Why did you send that message?" she asked. Ezra frowned slightly. "What message?" Miriam looked at him. "The unknown number. Ask Demas how he knew your mother had already met Miriam." Ezra shook his head slowly. "That was not me." A silence. Then, simultaneously, they both understood. "Your mother," Miriam said quietly. Ezra nodded slowly. "My mother." They sat with that for a moment. The woman who had come to that small room to end things had been the one to turn everything around. "She called me," Miriam said. Ezra looked at her. She apologized. Something moved across Ezra's face. Not surprise. Something deeper. The particular emotion of a person who discovers that the people they love are more than the worst thing they have done. He looked at Miriam. "There is something else I need to tell you," he said. Miriam waited. Ezra was quiet for a moment. He looked around the room, then back at her. The small room, the clerical job, the one bag, the borrowed life. Miriam watched him. None of it was real. The room was quiet. "I mean, it was real. I lived it. Every day of it was real. But it was not the truth of who I am." He looked at her directly. "My father is Jairus, the chairman of Gold Rock Enterprises, the company where we both work. I am his only son. I left everything, the house, the cars, the life, and came to Asaba with one bag because I needed to know if anyone could love me without all of that around me." Miriam looked at him. She did not speak immediately. She simply looked at him with those large, calm eyes, the way she had always looked at him, steadily, completely, without flinching. The silence lasted long enough for Ezra to feel the full weight of what he had just said. Then Miriam spoke. "The man in that small room," she said quietly, "the one who sat on the edge of that bed, the one who stayed late to complete impossible tasks without complaint, the one who said never mind in a corridor because he could not bring himself to walk away." She looked at him. "That is the man I know. That is the man I chose." A pause. "The rest of it," she looked around briefly, "is just a room." Ezra looked at her for a long moment. Then he exhaled slowly, the way a person exhales when they have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and have finally been allowed to put it down. That night, they returned to the small room, not because they had to, because they chose to. Miriam sat in the plastic chair. Ezra sat on the edge of the bed. The ceiling fan turned slowly overhead. The faded cream walls held the warm evening light the way they always had. Nothing in the room had changed, and yet everything in the room was different. They talked the way they used to, about small things, about the weeks that had passed, about Demas, about Naomi, about the soup that had started everything. At some point, Miriam laughed at something Ezra said. Not a polite laugh, a real one. And Ezra, who had not laughed in this room for a very long time, laughed too. The small room held the sound of it for a moment, and then the quiet returned. But this time, the quiet felt honest. Ezra looked at her. "I do not want to go back to the mansion," he said. Miriam raised an eyebrow slightly. He smiled. "Not yet. Not tonight." She nodded once. "All right," she said, and the evening continued. The ceiling fan turned, the old walls breathed, and in a small, forgotten room in the streets of Asaba, something that had nearly been lost was quietly, completely found.
Later, as Miriam was preparing to leave, Ezra stood up. He looked at her. His expression was different from anything she had seen before. Not the careful, guarded look of a man running a test. Not the troubled, distant look of a man carrying doubt. Just Ezra, open, present, real. "Miriam," he said. She stopped, turned. "I came to Asaba with one question. I think I have had the answer for a long time. I just needed everything else to fall away before I could say it clearly." She waited. He looked at her and said, "Will you stay? Not in Asaba, not in a small room, in my life, as it really is. All of it." Miriam looked at him for a long moment. The plastic chair, the small bed, the ceiling fan, the man standing in front of her who had walked away from everything to find something real and had found her. "I already stayed," she said simply, "when it was hardest. I am not going anywhere now." Ezra looked at her, and for the first time in this entire story, he had absolutely nothing left to carry.
In Buguma, Naomi sat in her sitting room. The room was quiet. The evening light was soft and warm. Her phone rested in her lap. She had received a message from Ezra. 2 sentences. She stayed. "Thank you." Naomi read it once, then again. She set the phone down slowly, and for a long time she simply sat with the particular stillness of a woman who has been proud and stubborn and wrong, and has been given the grace of a second chance. Outside the window, the city of Buguma moved through its evening the way it always did, ordinary, unhurried, alive. Naomi looked at the window. A small smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Not triumphant, not proud, just quiet. The smile of a mother who had nearly destroyed the best thing her son had ever found and had been allowed in the end to help save it instead. Some people come into your life to test you. Some come to destroy you. And some, the ones that matter most, simply stay, even when staying is the hardest thing, even when everything around them says leave. This has been She Knew All Along. Thank you for watching every part. If this story touched your heart, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that real love still exists. Subscribe to Life Stories with the Innocent for more stories that matter. Thank you so much for watching. The end of the story.